Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the third chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to cover the range of the first 15 verses, and the dominant theme that we notice is the cycles of life. And this takes us back to the first chapter. The book of Ecclesiastes opens. It asks the question, what is the meaning of life? And this question was motivated by the personal predicament of Solomon, who had wealth, he had wisdom, he had every earthly delight and satisfaction, yet something was missing. And he just bemoans the futility of two things in the first chapter. He bemoans the futility of all. He noticed that all the changes in nature are trapped in a prison, in a cycle of permanence. So as the sun goes from one way to the other, that is a change in itself, but there is still nothing new under the sun. So he bemoans, you're not going to find answers or meaning in looking in nature, but you can look to the God who made it. So in the first two chapters, nowhere does the word Yahweh or Elohim appear. Then he closes the chapter by bemoaning the futility of wisdom itself, and he says that the price of wisdom is greater grief, because the more wise you become, the more aware of imperfections you are. And you become aware of forces beyond your ability to comprehend, far less control. So one of the true marks of wisdom is an accompanying awareness of how little you know that increases in proportion to how much you learn. The second chapter, he bemoans the futility or meaningless or purposelessness of three things, the first of which is pleasure and comfort itself. So he's frustrated. He's looking for the answer in wisdom and does not find it, so he forsakes it. He's going to live the life of a hedonist. He certainly had the wealth at his disposal and the resources for any sensual or earthly pleasure imaginable. I said in my heart, "Come now, let me try you with rejoicing to find out what is good," but see too, that was futile. Immediate gratification can provide no meaningful or lasting or permanent satisfaction. It is a momentary pleasure. So the delights of wine, sex, and just about every other source imaginable of what constitutes immediate gratification, good can come of it, but it's fleeting and it's vanishing and it's futile and it's vain. It's a vapor. That word hebal translate as futile in this verse. Vain in the King James is from the Hebrew word hebal, which translates as vapor or mist. So that is how empty the life of pleasure is. And he says the same thing about wisdom, and he says the same thing about everything in nature itself. And he talks about his achievements. You know, he was a great builder. He had all these he had outstanding harems of beautiful women and just all these things of the king, and he had silver and gold beyond measure, and he had prestige and power in the geopolitical struggle, and he became great and increased more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. So Solomon's reign constitutes a golden age of the united monarchy, and the reason that it was a golden age is because wisdom was united with power in the form of Solomon. So Solomon preempts the Platonic idea. He was the actualization of the Platonic ideal of a philosopher king. Verse 10, "In all that my eyes desired I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion from all my labor." As a king, the only force or entity that could stop himself from having anything he wanted, his any heart's whims or desire, would have been himself. He ruled absolutely. So he could indulge in any pleasure imaginable, and he certainly did. He collected concubines, but he had a harem of about 300 and 700 wives by the tail end. But rejoicing in all his labor, now we are certainly entitled to enjoy what we have earned, but if we take the wrong perspective is to be grateful for the gift and neglect the giver. That is ingratitude, and that is idolatry. "But then I looked at on all the works which my hand has done, and on all this labor which I had toiled, and see all was futile and feeding on the wind, and there was no gain under the sun." The third thing he bemoans is the futility of toil and labor and just working. So all this pleasure was only possible because he had worked so hard. He had a substantial princely inheritance. David was certainly a wealthy king, but Solomon was wealthy beyond measure, and the wealth and the wisdom were closely connected. He applied and utilized the great gift of wisdom that he had to amass for himself this outstanding, tremendous fortune. But it was all in vain because he was not going to live to see it, and he did not know the state of his successor. Verse 13, he compares the relative merits of wisdom and folly. And remember, in the first chapter, he closes bemoaning the futility of wisdom, and then he transitions to folly or pleasure or comfort or immediate gratification. Verse 13, then I saw wisdom is better than folly, as light is better than darkness. The wise one's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And I also know that one event befalls them all. So even though the wise have the guidance and the light and the discernment and the compass to navigate through life, they cannot prevent death. But wisdom is better. It is better to have wisdom while you live, because wisdom will enable you to navigate through life's difficulties, but it is ultimately futile in the sense that it cannot prevent death. But you have to think on death, because man has a plague of fear against the subject of death. They'll just change the channel on the remote control whenever they don't want to think about it. They don't want to talk about it. But if you are not prepared to die, you are not prepared to live. And I said in my heart, as the event of the fool, even so it befalls me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this is also futile. So he reaffirms his earlier conclusion of the futility and the vanity of wisdom itself, because in this case, it not only added grief to his life in the first chapter, but it also could not prevent death. And Solomon is his most mature musings. The Song of Solomon was written when he was young. The Book of Proverbs is his middle years. Ecclesiastes is his most mature musing. So he is approaching death's door, and that is why he is thinking about these things. And in the Book of Proverbs, he seems to have all the answers about the usefulness of wisdom. Now he is questioning the very value of wisdom itself. It cannot prevent death, and he's approaching that door. Verse 17, and I hated life because of the work that was done under the sun and the evil on me, for all is futile and feeding on wind. He hated life. He was dissatisfied with his life, but he was not ready to end it. And the reason he hated life so much was because death was around the corner and death was at the door. And all these things he had achieved and amassed and accumulated were he's just aware that he can take none of it with him, and who's going to get it. And and I hated all my labor which I had toiled under the sun, because I leave it to a man who will come after me, and who knows whether he is wise or foolish. This son and successor would have been Rehoboam, who ultimately splintered the United Kingdom through his catastrophic error of judgment. So he was certainly in the category of fool. A wise parent does not guarantee a wise son or children. Righteous parents do not always necessarily breed righteous children. But the state of his successor was certainly an occasion to bemoan, and he probably knew the quality and the caliber of the character of Rehoboam, and he was a morally mediocre man at best. A man could do no better than but to eat and to drink and to enjoy himself in his labor. That too I saw was from the hand of Elohim. For who eats or who finds enjoyment without him? He who eats or finds enjoyments to delight in the gifts but neglect the giver is ingratitude and is also idolatry. So there's nothing wrong with a man is entitled to enjoy what he has earned, a man and a woman. Everyone's should be allowed to flourish in proportion to their talents and labors, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying the fruits of our labor, but there is something wrong if we enjoy it while neglecting the giver of the gifts. For he gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his eyes, but to the sinner he gives the task of gathering and collecting to give to the good before Elohim. That too is futile and feeding on wind. So these gifts that he gives to men that he loves as a mark and measure of his love, he gave Solomon great wisdom and knowledge and joy. And even though Solomon had no lasting satisfaction at this moment in his life, he did lead a good life. He had plenty of reasons to be happy. but it all kind of vanished as he got older and older. But the sinner, there is no profit in ill-gotten gain. This message is communicated in Proverbs, and so wealth in the hand of a sinner is not going to be last. It's not going to bring any. It's not going to do anything, and it doesn't mean anything. It is also futile and feeding on wind. So the word futile, remember the word Hebel, the Hebrew original, translates as vist or vapor. So that's connected to the wind. First verse, third chapter, book of Ecclesiastes. To all there is an appointed time, even a time for every pursuit under the sun, under the heavens. So there is a definite purpose and a timing for everything. It is providentially arranged for a select purpose in the wise mind of an omniscient architect who these seasons, they may seem to mean nothing because there is nothing new in them, as he bemoans on his observations of them in the first chapter, the patterns and cycles of nature and life. But there is a definite purpose for everything, and he proceeds to tell that through 14 pairs of contrast of things that are, there is a definite reason and purpose. So timing is not an accident, it is an appointment. There's no chaos or coincidences in the universe. Everything has its reason and has its season, and there is a reason for the season in which it is born. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot. These are the first two of the 14 paired stars, a time to be born and a time to die. Everyone who is born has to die. This is an inescapable fact of life. And but how we live in between the beginning and the end, if we have wisdom, that can make a difference. We can navigate through the difficulties of life and struggle with the perplexing challenges of, the life of wisdom is not easy, but it does make a difference in navigating our life. And the question of death, the preparation of death is paramount to successful living, because he who is not prepared to die cannot claim to be living rightly or living properly. So now in the third chapter, he takes a more panoramic view. He speaks of things like Elohim and eternity. So he takes a dramatically different perspective. A time to plant and a time to uproot. This would have been reaping, sowing and then reaping. And even though one sows and other waters, Elohim gives the increase. So the miracle of life itself, we do our part, but the ultimate miracle for the growth of the crops is, and a farmer must work with nature if he wants nature to work for him. A time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up. Let's interpret this one Christologically. We know that he was a healing man. There was no cripple, no blind, no lame, no demon possessed that he would not heal if they were in his proximity and he had the power. That is something he did. And he was killed and he never killed anyone, but he's going to return as a king on a white horse with an army of legions, with a sword in hand to violently eliminate evil. So even though he came to the earth the first time as a lamb, he shall return as a lion, and he will kill. But killing is not shouldn't be necessary, but it is necessary. If you are a soldier in a battlefield, and being a Christian soldier is not an impossible balancing act. Obviously, the goal of war is to kill and break things. So that's a definite purpose, and there is a reason for the wars in human history. One of the things they do is prevent overpopulation. And time to break down and a time to break up. Now, the positive and the negative are both necessary to hold an equality and balance. So, we are to edify, to build up, be constructive, but also we are to cast down and break down every argument, every exalted idea that raises itself against the knowledge of Elohim. 2 Corinthians 10:4 or 5. A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Now, what makes one weep and what makes one laugh is a pretty accurate barometer into the character of the person. And I hate to do it, but I'm going to single out Governor Cuomo of New York when he was rejoicing that women are now allowed to slaughter babies 9 months into the womb and even outside the womb. And the whole New York Assembly was rejoicing. This is not a civil rights milestone legislation. This is a all-time low in moral depravity, and just these smug smirks on their faces. It's truly satanic and demonic. But there are, you don't want to mourn at a feast or dance at a funeral. These are the places you don't want to do them. But to return to the what makes one laugh and what makes one cry. A wise person will, not take everything personal. They will have the perspective. They will not, we delight in insults and persecutions and reproaches. 2 Corinthians 12, 10. And we don't laugh at others' expense. It's okay to laugh at things, but, the danger is when you start to laugh at other people. But even there is comforting in mourning, and the frowns can be turned upside down. This is one of the profoundest paradoxes in the Beatitudes, which is the profoundest paradox to begin with. And a time to dance. Now, festive occasions do demand dancing, and there's nothing unrighteous about dancing, as long as it's wholesome. A time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. So the throwing away stones and the gathering of stones. Now, the ancient agriculture of Palestine had rocks in the fields, and rocks were the enemies. These were worse than weeds for the growth, because nothing could grow in rocky soil. So one of the things that the farmers had to do was work with nature in order to get nature to work for him, and they had to physically dig up the rocks to break up the soil so that it would be more fallow. There would be more nutrients and sustenance available. Sustenance through that, and a time to embrace. Now we should be friendly to all, but selective at what we tolerate. And I think indiscriminate tolerance is one of the destructive vices of postmodernism. We are asked to tolerate transvestite sex offenders who are male, wearing skirts without any underwear, showing their genitalia to our children in reading libraries. That's where we need to draw the line of what we accept, because tolerance is the last virtue of a depraved society, because once all the other virtues are exhausted, the only thing left for me to do is to demand that you tolerate my sin and my wickedness. A time to seek and a time to look, a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away. Seeking, now we are to seek first the kingdom of Elohim and its righteousness, and not the temporal pursuits of the earth, and all these things will be added unto us. So seek above all else, and blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see Elohim. So seeking leads to seeing. The things we want to see demand seeking. So before we can see, we have to seek. We have to, the destiny, this is the journey part of the destination of the things we want to hold. And we have to learn to live without the things, get rid of the waste. If anything's tying us down, just get rid of it, get it, discard it, and nothing is wasted in God's economy. I'll just give one crude example of a scatological analogy. The fecal matter of animals, which is their digested waste, is actually conducive to the growth of crops. So it is a fertilizer, and so nothing is wasted, but sometimes we have to learn to waste certain things, and we have to keep our priorities and our values in constant assessment and know what to keep and what to discard when the occasion demands. A time to tear and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to, tearing and sewing are both part of the same process of constructing clothes, which would have been something people had to do more intimately or directly in the ancient world. But not every occasion, you don't always have to, a fool delights in self-advertising. This much is communicated in the book of Proverbs. One of the characteristics of foolish people is that foolishness is that it is self-aggrandizing by nature, so it makes itself known, and the heart of a prudent man concealeth knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaimeth folly. So they can't help themselves. But the wise will know when to hold their tongue and when to speak, and when they speak, they will make it count, and a little words from the wise carry a whole lot more distance than the many words of the fool. A time to love and a time to hate, a time for battle and a time for peace. A time to love. Now, love is self-evident and axiomatic. This is the axiomatic assumption that we are to love. The two great commandments are love Yahweh thy Elohim with all thy might, faculties, and all your faculties and all their capacity, and love your fellow neighbor as yourself, your fellow man. But the question of hate is a little more complex because it seems almost alien and anathema to the Christian ethos. And I do comment on this in the book I wrote, Who is My Neighbor? An extensive commentary on the Good Samaritan parable, available for purchase at most major online outlets. And I answer the question thus: we are never to hate anyone, but it is sometimes necessary and righteous to hate some things, including evil in general. Psalms 97:10, you should have a Bible while you're doing this. And bribes in particular, Exodus 18:21. We are to hate false doctrines and deeds, Revelation 2:6, 14, 15, and are to align our hatreds with the things that the Father hates, Proverbs 6:16, 19, Psalms 139:22. So there's an idolatrous imagining that God is so loving that he cannot hate a single thing, but anyone who makes that claim has not read the scriptures with discernment or diligence. You can look up these verses. We must never hate evil people, only the evil it is that they do. We must hate it when people are oppressed, when children are sick and starving, and when Yahweh is dishonored. Only in a perfect world would it be possible to be at peace with all men at all times. We live in a fallen world. It's a corrupt and perverted world, but the danger and the challenge is not to hate those who hate us. We are to love them in spite of themselves. Nevertheless, we must be intolerant and hate the evil that they do. So not hate the transvestite sex offender, but hate the fact that he is doing what he is doing, that I mentioned earlier. Time for battle and a time for peace. This is part of the geopolitical chessboard. It can be explained scientifically through methods of political science and quantifiable measures of resources, but it can also be explained theologically. It is an act of providence. So all the nations are puppets and pawns in the hands of providence, and he takes some away, he discards, and he upkeeps others. That is all. So battle and peace are necessary for the relations between nations. And Solomon's father, David, was a warrior king. He provided his son an inheritance of a kingdom that was safe from all its borders, no territorial encroachment. So Solomon's reign was to be the reign of peace, and it was under his reign that the temple was to be built, because David was a man of war and had too much blood on his hands. He was a man after God's own heart, and he yearned to be the one to build the temple, but his prayer was answered that his son would live to build it, and he was promised a dynasty in perpetuity. Verse 9. What does the worker gain from the toil? He already bemoans the futility and the fleetingness and the vanishing vanity of toil in the second chapter. I have seen the task Elohim has given to the sons of men, to be humbled by it. So Solomon, he could have been prone to pride, but he was humbled by his awful burden and responsibility of ruling the covenant nation, and this much is reflected in his earliest prayer. When he was 19 years old, he was wise in recognizing his lack of wisdom to complete the task. So he did have a seed of wisdom, and he was wise to his credit. He did ask the right thing. So he did approach his burden and responsibilities with air of humility. He knew his own nothingness, and he knew the greatness of the nation and the greatness of the God he served, and he did not want to let them, or especially him, down. So he was humble in asking, and Ecclesiastes is perhaps the most beautiful and poignant expression of Solomonic wisdom in all of literature. He has made it all pretty in its time, even the ages he has put into the hearts, except that no one finds out the work that Elohim does from beginning to end. He is the creator of everything that is observable, the creator of the spirit world and the physical world. And beautiful, there is the beauty of creation and nature and just these galaxies and these outer space nebulas are just a marvelous witness of his creative ingenuity. He is the best artist. No human can adequately compare to the creator of the cosmos. But even the ages, now this is alternately and perhaps better translated as eternity. So man is the only creature that knows he's going to die, but he's also the only one with a sense of an eternal destiny. So we have this hope inside us that death is not the final end, and it's a yearning that is native and natural to every human, that death is not the end. There is a life after death, and this life as we know it is not all of experience as we know it. So we alone have the capacity and the endowment to cultivate eternal priorities and eternal values, and even contemplate the concept of eternity. That is a gift from God, and he does give us a plan and a path to eternity in his fellowship. But man is subject to time. We are all born, we all die, we all have definite dates of arrival. But our death is not the end, so we are immortal. We are not eternal. Eternal means from beginning to end. That is the panoramic span of the time-space continuum that is only occupied by the creator of the cosmos, who supersedes time itself. I know that there is no good for them but to rejoice and to do good in their lives. So this is what life boils down to. It's grateful gratitude and righteous rejoicing. What makes one rejoice and what makes one weep, remember, is the accurate barometer of one's character. But also doing good. No harm can come from do good. So think good, do good, be good, act good, and live good. Think no evil, inflict no harm, none of those things, by the opposite inverse, and that is a life well lived. And also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is a gift from Elohim. This rings a bell from 2nd chapter 24 through 25th verse, where he describes it as a gift. So God is the controlling element in our gratitude. We have to enjoy the gift. We have to appreciate it and accept it and receive it as it is given, which is a gift. In order for a gift to have any value, it has to be accepted by the recipient. So all the pagan idolaters who are grateful for the gifts but not the giver, they are missing the meaning of life. Life is more than consuming and enjoying. We have an eternal perspective. Immediate gratification is a road to sure destruction. The life devoted to the pursuit thereof. I know that whatever Elohim does is forever. There is no adding to it, and there is no taking from it. Elohim does it, that men should fear before him. He is an eternal being. He springs from eternity. He was in the beginning. He was before the beginning. He's going to be there in the end. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the same yesterday, today, and forever. So there's nothing we can presume to even add to him. Our prayers do not add a single iota to his infinite attributes, but he does take delight in them. So the idea that no gift we can give is satisfactory to God is erroneous, but ultimately all our gifts come from the one who gave us the gifts that we are just returning. We really lend it. But the idea, the fact of his eternality and the consequent and attendant awareness of our own frailty, our own mortality, our own destiny to decay and perish with the laws of physics should stimulate a righteous fear of Elohim, because in him lies our eternal destiny. And it's interesting to examine what Solomon says about the final judgment throughout the range of Ecclesiastes. 15th and final verse, whatever is has already been, and what shall be has been before, but Elohim seeks out what has been pursued. So these cycles, these permanent cyclical cycles that seem unchanging, they are patterns, they are not prisons. Elohim is sovereign, and he can intervene or interrupt anyone, and one of the ways he did that was through the incarnation. He entered into human affairs in the meridian of time. That was according to schedule, and there was literally nothing like it. That was something the likes of which was something radically new, that the Word became flesh and pitched his tent among men. So Solomon is writing from a limited vantage point of personal observation, but he is beginning to gain balance and perspective on his conclusion. He does reach a satisfactory conclusion by the 12th chapter, but he's starting to say the right things. God and eternity are on his mind and his heart, whereas they were missing and absent from the first 2 chapters. And he also recognizes that everything happens is an appointment, not an accident. So if there's a purpose for everything that transpires under the sun, that means there is a definite purpose to us. And the meaning of life, finding it is contingent on finding the purpose of our life. And our purpose can only come from one whose purpose is greater than our own. Our value can only come from one whose value is exceedingly greater than our own. That's why I'm here. I hope that's why you're here. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.